Today we're going to be taking a look at the Airlift 1000 air helper springs for our rear coil springs. Now before we install our airbags, what we're going to do is take a few measurements with the truck unloaded. That way we know how high it's sitting, and after we put some weight in the bed of our truck with our airbags installed, we're going to know how much to inflate them to achieve that same factory ride height. From the ground to the edge of our wheel well, it's right at 36 inches. And here at the rear, from the ground to the edge of the wheel well, it's about 38.5 inches. Now we went ahead and put a considerable amount of weight in the bed of our truck. So now let's take those measurements again. Here at the front, from the ground to the edge of the wheel well, it's going to be 37 inches. And here at the back, it's going to be about 34.5. So what that means, now since the front of our truck is pointed up higher or sitting higher, our headlights aren't going to be shining down on the road as they should be. We're going to have increased tire wear, and we're going to lose a little bit of braking and steering performance as well. Here at the back of the truck, it's going to be squatting down, and that means a couple of things. We're going to lose a lot of our suspension travel, which in turn will make for a more harsh ride inside, and we're just going to overall increase the wear on our suspension components. Now let's go ahead and take our truck out on the test course to see how it performs. Now as we go over our bumps, you can tell the steering is a little more sloppy than it was. You can really feel every bump here inside the truck. It's really rough, and it almost just feels like our rear suspension is almost bottoming out. Now as I go through our slalom course and do some evasive maneuvering, you can really feel that weight throwing us around. Little delayed steering response, and overall just a more uncomfortable ride. Now that we have our airbags installed, went ahead and put some weight in our bed again, and now we can take our measurements. Here at the back, from the ground to the edge of the wheel well, it's about 38 inches. So that's just a little short of our factory ride height with nothing in the bed. And here at the front, we're going to be right at 36 inches. So that's the same as the stock height with nothing loaded in the bed. Which in turn, that means when we're loaded down, our truck is going to ride nice and level as it would when it was empty. And that's really going to help increase the life of our suspension, give us our steering and braking power back. We're not also going to have to worry about our headlights shining up into the sky and possibly another motorist's eyes. And it's just going to overall increase our driving experience. Now let's go ahead and go over some bumps. As we go over these bumps, right away you can tell the steering wheel stays centered much better. We're not nearly getting thrown around inside of the truck here as much. It's just going to provide us a nice smoother ride. Now as we go through our slalom course and make some evasive maneuvering, right off the bat you can feel that our steering is a lot more responsive, way less body roll, and we just feel more planted to the ground. The airbags are actually going to sit inside of your factory coil spring, so this is what they're going to look like once they're installed. Now compared to some of the other options available out there, these are going to be a good choice, especially if you're trying to customize your ride. And that's because these are adjustable. So if you have a somewhat heavy load, you can fill these up about halfway. And if you have an extremely heavy load, you can put more air in them to fine-tune your ride. And you're actually going to have the ability to control both bags at the same time with the same pressure, or you can adjust each bag individually. So for example, say if your load is more heavy on the right side, you can put more air pressure in the right bag and less in the left. Now the downside to these is there is a little bit of maintenance required. You are going to have to make sure you have a minimum amount of air pressure in each bag. So when those cold temperatures come in, you're going to have to check them every now and again to make sure you have that air pressure in them. Also, it's not a bad idea every now and again too to check everything for leaks. But in my opinion, the trade-off is definitely worth it. Just to spend a little bit of time, check your bags, make sure everything's good to get that custom ride. Now these do give us 1,000 pounds of load leveling support. Now keep in mind, these aren't going to add to your truck's weight capacity, they're just going to work in conjunction with it. It's never a bad idea either to check with your truck's owner's manual to make sure you know those capacities and stay safe. And if you want to go a step further, there is air compressors available that'll allow you to inflate, deflate, and monitor your bags from inside of your cab. The bags themselves are made from a molded polyurethane, so you know they're going to hold up well against the elements and last a long time. To begin your installation, you're going to want to jack your truck up in such a way that either the body itself raises or your axle drops. So either way is fine. All we're trying to do is get our coil spring to stretch out as much as possible. That way we'll have the most room to get our airbag inside. Now we're going to grab our airbag, and on one end of it we're going to have a little rubber cap. We can just pull that off. Now what we're going to do is compress it to squeeze all the air out of it to make it as small as possible. So I kind of push down on the center. And work out as much as that air as you can. We'll take our cap and put it back on, that way it'll be sealed. Now a trick that I found that makes everything a lot easier, if you take some long zip ties, you kind of fold the bag in on itself, wrap that zip tie around it, once you get the center zip tie on, the next one you're going to want to do is the one towards the bottom without the valve. I kind of fold that like so, zip tie around it. Go ahead and tighten these two up. Pretty good. Now we'll remove our rubber plug and fold this one in on itself. Do the same thing, we'll run that zip tie around it. Once we have all three of our zip ties secured, you tighten them all up. Try to get all that air out, make it as small as possible. Now before we put our bag in, we're going to connect our hose to it, and it'll make it a little bit easier. Now when we cut our hose, you want to make sure that it has a nice, clean, straight cut. So I'm using some razor cutters. So you want that cut to look just like that. The kit's going to come with a little clamp, and we're going to slide that on the hose first. So we will open it up and just slide it a little ways down the hose. Now we're able to come to our fitting. We're going to push that hose completely on. And if you are having a little bit of trouble getting it on, one thing you can do is just cut this top zip tie. Open that bag up a little bit more. That'll give you a little more room to kind of work that hose on. Once we have it completely seated, go ahead and take your clamp, work that down, make sure it's on there nice and tight. And if you had to cut your zip tie, go ahead and put a new one back on. So now we can feed our bag into the coil spring. Now we're going to want the side that has the airline tube to face up. So what I'm going to do is just take the end of our airline, put that through first. We can kind of pinch that bag down and get it started. Now we're going to take our disc here, put that through the airline, run it into the coil spring. We're going to take the rest of the airline, run it through the coil spring as well. And And at the very top of the coil spring, there's going to be an opening. We're going to push that air line, the end of it, through that opening, and that'll come out underneath our truck bed. You're going to have to kind of reach up over your frame. It's going to be a little tricky to see, so you have to go by feel and grab your air line. We'll kind of just pull all that slack out. Now we're able to finish putting our bag in the coil spring. We're just going to kind of have to work it all the way up. And once we have it in there, we can carefully cut our zip ties and let that bag fill up full of air. And straighten it out as best you can. Just like that. Now I went ahead and routed our airline tubing. Now right up here is where it comes out of our airbag, and you want to make sure you have a little bit of slack up here since the suspension will move. You don't want it to get bound up or real tight and accidentally break. So make sure you have a little bit of wiggle room. I ran the wire over this cross member here along the side of the frame, and I secured it to some factory wiring we had. And I do want to point out, whenever you're routing your wire, you want to make sure to avoid anything hot or moving. I just followed that along that factory wiring. Then I came up above our hitch towards the center and dropped it down right here, because what I'm going to do is mount it in a hole that we have here in the hitch. And once you cut your air line to length, once again, make sure you have that real clean cut on it. We can go ahead and put in all of our fittings. The first thing that goes on is another small clamp. Run it down a little ways. And we can actually take our Schrader valve and this end that has the barbs, put that into the airline tube, and we can put our clamp over it. Make sure it's seated nice and tight. Now at this point, I'm going to take a regular nut and thread that all the way down. We're going to take one of our star washers, put that on, and then I'm going to poke our Schrader valve through this hole in the hitch where we're going to permanently mount it. Now here on the other side, what goes on after that is the rubber washer. I'll slide that over. We're going to put on a flat washer. We're going to follow that up with a nut. Go ahead and tighten these down by hand. Once we have it hand tight, we can come back with a 13 millimeter, and we'll just snug these up a little bit so they don't go anywhere. Now at this point, if you have any hanging airline, you can kind of tuck that up out of the way and secure it with some zip ties to keep it nice and clean. Now to get the passenger side airbag in, you're just going to repeat that same process, which I have done here. And I do want to show you how I routed my airline. Like I said, we'll have some slack at the top. That way it doesn't get bound up. And actually, instead of running it directly towards the back of the truck, I came to the side, ran it along this cross member over to the driver's side. That way we can avoid all of our exhaust. And then I dropped it down along our frame here on the driver's side. Here's where it dropped down, and I actually just followed the same route that we took for our driver's side. Only difference being, what I did was I just ran it over to the passenger side of the hitch and mounted our air fitting on that side to correspond with the passenger side airbag. With everything installed, what we're going to do now is either raise or lower the truck to get that coil spring to compress And what we're trying to do is do it just enough that the airbag makes contact with both the top and bottom spring mount. Now there is something I do want to mention. The way we routed our airlines here is we actually have one fitting for each airbag. That way we have more adjustability. However, you can run both bags together and have one fitting. That way you can fill them up or deflate them the same on each side. And to do that, you would just use this included T-fitting. So the way this would work is the airbag on the driver's side, you would run to this end of the fitting. The passenger side would run to this end of the fitting. And then you would run your hose off the single one back to here and put on your Schrader valve. With that being said, we can go ahead and fill both of our airbags up to 35 psi and check for leaks. With our bags full of air, we can then use some soapy water and spray down all of our fittings to check for leaks. Now what we're looking for is any bubbles that'll constantly keep forming. Once we verify we don't see any forming bubbles, we know there's no leaks, and we know that connection's good. And not only can you visually check with your soapy water for leaks, but you can also stay quiet and listen and see if you hear any air leaking. Once you've completely checked your whole airbag system for leaks and verified everything is good, you're ready to lower your vehicle back down to its normal ride height and hit the road. And that'll finish up our look of the Airlift 1000 Air Helper Springs.